Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Our presentation will begin shortly.
Oh, hello there. Yes, I just wanted to post this up because I think it's actually quite important. Talk Radio, James Max. James Max is a proper journalist of the old school. I mean, he's a few years younger than me, but nevertheless sort of comes from that kind of background that, if you like, probably is assuming that we need to advance with a certain set of common values. I know the word common is there in the background, but these kind of things are often lost in the hyper-reality that is modern social media. And I think it's worthwhile just listening to what he has to say, because I think what he has to say is actually pretty important. I'm going to stop this just a couple of times, and I do want to make one proviso at the end. So let's have a listen.
Good morning to you. I don't think you could have avoided it yesterday on Twitter, because yesterday I did speak to Kellie-Jay, founder of Standing for Women, regarding the absence of the author J.K. Rowling from the upcoming Harry Potter reunion TV special. And to be honest, a lot of things about that have happened in the last 24 hours. So there are a few things probably that need to be said, and there are a few things that need to be discussed, and maybe there's some learning to be done. That having been said, when one listens to these discussions and these debates, if anybody thinks that I, or indeed others, don't understand the complexities and how toxic the discussion has become about women and women's rights, but then also about trans and trans issues, then, you know, we need to wake up. This is a very difficult area to have a conversation about. And frankly, when I went into the discussion, I was thinking, well, I don't really understand why J.K. Rowling, you know, she's written all these books and they're not speaking to her. And to be honest, it's not something that I'd looked into that deeply. Of course, every single subject that we do research, we look into it, we think about it, I read things. But there are a lot of subjects covered in a 4-hour radio show. So I'm not necessarily going to go into every minutiae. And frankly, I've steered clear of this topic. And I've steered clear of this topic because I know how toxic it is. And most people do steer clear of it because they know how toxic it is. But when Kellie-Jay started to talk about things in the way that she did, I'm afraid I found a lot of what she said deeply uncomfortable. And I found it deeply uncomfortable because stereotypes and tropes that were used 20 years ago to describe gay people and to not allow them the human rights that thankfully we have in today's world, you know, whether you go back to Section 28 or all the other things that we had, all those discussions about what you teach young people, how you teach them at school, or the fact that the predators and all this other stuff that went out, it was all being repeated, and I felt very uncomfortable about that.
Just to sort of dive in there, and I mean, if you look back at some of my videos about similar subjects, it's exactly my point. Those of us of a certain age, let's say 50 plus, recognise all of these arguments about trans issues as being identical to arguments about gay people in the 80s, and the demon bogeyman of the sexual predator, oh, think of the children, will always be raised, and it needs to be said. Pardon the pun, but this isn't a binary issue. Let's move on.
In addition, I feel very uncomfortable when people start to talk about something just with a broad brush, because we've seen how minorities are treated in society. We've seen what happens when minorities are treated badly, whether it's because of their religion or the way they live their lives or the fact that they are perhaps slightly different from the norm. And I know that lots of people have told me on Twitter that, you know, we're speaking for the 51% and you're just a minority and what do you know, and you're a man and you're middle-aged and all the abuse and everything else. And it's become so toxic that we can't have a proper conversation about it. This is the home of free speech. And yesterday went away when I said, oh, you know, maybe you should be cancelled. It was more because that's what's happened to J.K. Rowling. That's what's happened to people within this debate. That's what's happened elsewhere. And we don't have proper conversations where there perhaps needs to be learning. So there we are. That's some of what I think about this, but not all.
Okay, just to sort of dive in there. Yes, that's probably his worst crime, is suggesting that somebody should be cancelled. Yeah, but over the last sort of 48 hours, there has been a lot of jumping and screaming and shouting and up and down motion about J.K. Rowling being cancelled from the Harry Potter reunion. And it transpires today that isn't actually the case, and therefore people who were jumping up and down about it 24, 48 hours ago are having to shift the argument because it makes them look a bit silly. And now it's simply come down to a kind of binary, pardon the pun, issue as about you're on our side or not with them. Them being obviously those people that support or otherwise are interested in trans issues. Well, the real world isn't like that. James Max is right here. This whole thing has become incredibly toxic, whereby the moment you take a stance which is just slightly over the middle line, you will be characterised as something or other by other people. However, my proviso with this lot, in particular with James Max, who works for Talk Radio, is that a lot of this polarisation comes from organisations like Talk Radio, who seem to be incapable of actually discussing nuances or any form of historical perspective around political issues. We end up with the what a giveaway. We end up with the Andre Walkers of the world simply going on and spouting absolute mindless drivel into people's ears because it's what they want to hear. And what people really want to hear is that them, the other side, are bad. And this, boils down to the fundamental problem that we have in 2020 plus, which is that so much of social media is simply geared to pushing you onto one side or another. On our side, there's the good people who believe the truth, and on the other side, there are the bad people who don't. Anyway, kudos to James Max, because I think the guy, often does actually stand up and says, do you know what, this is bollocks, and a lot more people need to do the same thing. It's actually really hard to do on media, a lot of social media. I found myself in the last 48 hours being cancelled by quite a few people. Banned on Twitter for making comments. Yeah, thank you, Kelvin. Simply because you say awkward things, and it's not playing the game. It's not playing the game. I'm awaiting Andre Walker's ban of me in about the next 12 hours. I'm sure it will come. Anyway, yes, kudos to James Max, someone that I do have time for.